The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, The Ghost Soldiers, Part 1. I was shot twice, the first time out by a tree by. It knocked me against the pagoda wall, and I bounced and spun around and ended up on Rat Kiley's lap. A lucky thing, because Rat was a medic. He tied on a compress and told me to ease back. Then he ran off toward the fighting. For a long time I lay there all alone, listening to the battle, thinking, I've been shot, I've been shot. All those Gene Artery movies I'd seen as a kid. In fact, I almost smiled, except then I started to think I might die. It was the fear, mostly, but I felt wobbly, and then I had a sinking sensation, ears all plugged up, as if I'd gone deep underwater. Thank God for Rat Kiley. Every so often, maybe 4 times altogether, he trotted back to check me out, which took courage. It was a wild fight. Guys running and laying down, fire and regrouping and running again, lots of noise. But Rat Kiley took all the risks. Easy does it, he told me. Side a wound, no problem unless you're pregnant. He ripped off the compress, applied a fresh one, and told me to clamp on it in place with my fingers. Press hard, he said. Don't worry about the baby. Then he took off. It was almost dark when the fighting ended, and the chopper came to take me and 2 dead guys away. Happy trails, Rat Kiley said. He helped me into the helicopter and stood there for a moment. Then he did an odd thing. He leaned in and put his head against my shoulder and almost hugged me. Coming from Rat Kiley, that was something new. On the ride to Chow Lai, I kept waiting for the pain to hit, but in fact I didn't feel much. A throb, that's all. Even in the hospital, it wasn't bad. When I got back to the Alpha Company 26 days later, in mid-December, Rat Kiley had been wounded and shipped off to Japan, and a new medic named Bobby Jorgensen had replaced him. Jorgensen was no Rat Kiley. He was green and incompetent and scared. So when I got shot the second time in the butt, along Song Trabong, it took the son of a bee almost 10 minutes to work up the nerve to crawl over to me. By then, I was gone with the pain. Later, I found out I'd almost died of shock. Bobby Jorgensen didn't know about shock, or if he did, the fear made him forget. To make it worse, he bungled up the patch job, and a couple of weeks later, my ass started to rot away. You could actually peel off chunks of skin with your fingernail. It was borderline gangrene. I spent a month flat on my stomach. I couldn't walk or sit. I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Bobby Jorgensen's scared white face, those buggy eyes, and the way his lips twitched and that silly excuse he had for a mustache. After the rot cleared up, once I could think straight, I devoted a lot of time to figuring ways to get back at him. Getting shot should be an experience from which you can draw some small pride. I don't mean the macho stuff. All I mean is that you should be able to talk about it. The stiff thump of the bullet, like a fist. The way it knocks out the air of you and makes you cough. How the sound of a gunshot arrives about 10 years later, and the dizzy feeling, the smell of yourself, the things you think about and say and do right afterward, the way your eyes focus on a tiny white pebble or a blade of grass, and how you start thinking, oh man, that's the last thing I'll ever see. That pebble, that blade of grass, which makes you want to cry. Pride isn't the right word. I don't know the right word. All I know is you shouldn't feel embarrassed. Humiliation shouldn't be a part of it. Diaper rash, the nurses call it. An in-joke, I suppose. But it made me hate Bobby Jorgensen the way some guys hated the VC. Gut hate. The kind of hate that just stays with you even in your dreams. I guess the higher-ups decided I'd been shot enough. At the end of December, when I was released from the 91st Evic Hospital, they transferred me over to Headquarters Company S4. the baton supply section. Compared to the boonies, it was a crushy dusty. We had regular hours. There was an EM club with beer and movies, sometimes even live floor shows. The whole blurry slow motion of the rear. For the first time in months, I felt reasonably safe. The battalion fire base was built into a hill just off Highway 1, surrounded on all sides by flat paddy land, and between us and the paddies there were reinforced bunkers and observation towers and trip flares and rolls of razor-tipped barbed wire. You could still die, of course. Once a month we'd get hit with motor fire. But you could also die in the bleachers at Met Stadium in Minneapolis. Bases loaded, Harmon Kilborough coming to the plate. I didn't complain. In an odd way, though, there were times when I missed the adventure, even the danger of the real war out in the boonies. It's a hard thing to explain to somebody who hasn't felt it, but the presence of death and danger has a way of bringing you fully awake. It makes things vivid. When you're afraid, you're really afraid, you see things you never saw before. You pay attention to the world. You make close friends. You become a part of the tribe, and you share the same blood. You give it together. You take it together. On the other hand, I'd already been hit with 2 bullets. I was superstitious. I believed in the odds with the same passion that my friend Kiowa had once believed in Jesus Christ, or the way Mitchell Sanders believed in the power of morals. I figured my war was over. If it hadn't been for the constant ache in my butt, I'm sure things would have worked out fine. But it hurt. At night, I had to sleep on my belly. That doesn't sound so terrible until you consider that I'd been a back sleeper all my life. I'd lay there all fidgety and tight. Then, after a while, I'd feel a swell of anger come on. I'd squirm around cussing, half nuts with pain. And pretty soon, I'd start remembering how Bobby Jorgensen had almost killed me. Shock, I'd think. How could he forget to treat for shock? I remember how long it took him to get me, and how his fingers were all jerky and nervous, and the way his lips kept twitching under that ridiculous little mustache. The nights were miserable. Sometimes I'd roam around the base. I'd head down to the wire, stare out at the darkness, out where the war was, and think up ways to make Bobby Jorgensen feel exactly what I felt. I wanted to hurt him. In March, Alpha Company came in for a stand down. I was there and a helipad to help the choppers. Mitchell Sanders and Azar and Harry Dobbins and Dave Jensen and Norman Bowker slapped hands with me, and we piled their gear in my Jeep and drove down to the Alpha Hooches. We partied until chow time. Afterward, we kept partying. It was one of the rituals. Even if you weren't in the mood, you did it on purpose and principle. By midnight, it was story time. Morty Phillips used up all his luck, Bowker said. I smiled and waited. There was a tempo on how stories got told. Bowker peeled open a finger blister and sucked on it. Go on, Azar said. Tell him everything. Well, that's about it. Poor Morty wasted all his luck, pissed it all away. Oh, nothing, Azar said. That dummy pisses it away on nothing. Norman Bowker nodded, started to speak, but then stopped and got up and moved to the cooler and shoved his hands deep into the ice. He was naked except for his shorts and dog tags. In a way, I envied him. All of them. Their deep bush tans, the sores and blisters, the stories, the in-it-togetherness. I felt close to them, yes, but I also felt a new sense of separation. My fatigues were starched. I had a neat haircut and the clean, sterile smell of the rear. They were still my buddies, at least on one level, but once you leave the boonies, the whole comrade business gets turned around. You become a civilian. You forfeit membership in the family, the blood fraternity. And no matter how hard you try, you can't pretend to be a part of it. That's how I felt, like a civilian. And it made me sad. These guys had been my brothers, and scooped up some ice against his chest. We'd love one another. Norman Bowker bent forward and scooped up some ice against his chest, pressing it there for a moment. Then he fished out a beer and snapped it open. It was about Mike he said quietly. One of those killer hot days, hot, and we're all popping salt tabs just to stay conscious. Can't barely breathe. Everyone's lying around, just grooving it. And after a while, somebody says, "Hey, where's Morty?" So Lieutenant does a head count. And guess what? No Morty. Gone. As I said, poof, no fucking Morty. Norman and Booker nodded. Anyhow, we sent out 2 search patrols. No dice, not a trace. Pausing a second, Bowker poured a trickle of beer into his blister and licked at it. By then, it was almost dark. Lieutenant Cross, he's all ready to have a fit. You know how he gets it, right? And then guess what? Take a guess. Morty shows, I said. You got it, man. Morty shows. We almost chalk him up as MIA. And then, bingo, he shows. Soaking wet, said Azar. Hey, listen. Okay, but tell it. Norman Booker frowned. Soaking wet, he said. Turns out the moron went for a swim. You believe that? All alone, he just takes off, hikes a couple of kilts, finds himself a river, and strips down and hops and starts doing the goddamn breaststroke or some such fine shit. No security, no nothing. I mean, the dude goes skinny dipping. Azar giggled. A hot day. Not a hot day, said Dave Jensen. Hot, though. Get the picture? Bowker said. This is Mike High we're talking about. Dinks everywhere, and the guy goes for a swim. Crazy, I said. I look across the hooch. 20 or 30 guys were there, some drinking, some passed out, but I couldn't find a Morty Phillips among them. Bowker smiled. He reached out and put his hand on my knee and squeezed. That's thicker, man. No more Morty. No? Morty's luck gets all used up, Bowker said. His hand still rested on my knee very lightly. A few days later, maybe a week, he feels real dizzy, pukes a lot, temperature zooms way up. I mean, the guy's sick. Jorgensen says he must have swallowed bad water on that swim, swallowed a VC virus or something. Bobby Jorgensen, I said. Where is he? Be cool. Where's my good buddy Bobby? Norman Booker made a short clicking sound with his tongue. You want to hear this? Yes or no? Sure I do. So listen up then. Morty gets sick, like you never seen nobody so bad off. This is a real kick-ass disease. He can't walk or talk, can't fart, can't nothing. He's paralyzed. Polio, maybe. Harry Dobbin shook his head. Not polio, you got it wrong. Maybe polio. No way, said Dobbin. Not polio. Well, hey, Booker said. I'm just saying what Jorgensen says. Maybe polio, or that weird elephant disease, elephantiasis, or whatever. Yeah, but not polio? Across the hooch, sitting off by himself, Azar grinned and snapped his finger. Either way, he said, it goes to show you, don't throw away luck on little stuff. Save it up. There it is, said Mitchell Sanders. Morty was overdue, Dave Jensen said. Overdue? Jensen said. Norman Booker nodded solemnly. You don't mess around like that. You don't fritter away all your luck. Amen, says Sanders. Polio, said Henry Dobbins. We sat quietly for a time. There was no need to talk, because we were thinking the same things, about Morty Phillips, and the way luck worked and didn't work, and how it was impossible to calculate the odds. There were a million ways to die. Getting shot was one way. Bobby traps and landmines, and grenade, and shock, and polio from a VC virus. Where's Jorgensen? I said. End of part 1.